My parents always ridiculed my passion for motorcycles, labeling it as a useless obsession. Yet, when my custom shop unexpectedly took off, they demanded a staggering $250,000 from me. Instead of giving in, I decided to sue them. But everything took a turn during Thanksgiving dinner when my sister revealed that I had a hidden fortune. In the end, they walked away with a mansion and the $250,000 they sought. I'm 32, a man who has always felt like the family disappointment. My parents didn't just think I was less impressive than my sister, they made it their mission to remind me of that every single day. While my younger sister, who is 30 and named Emily, was busy racking up academic awards and achieving straight A's, I was the guy who spent every waking moment in my neighbor's garage, learning the ins and outs of motorcycle repair. My fascination with bikes ignited when I was just 14. Our neighbor, whom I'll call Mr. Thompson, was a vintage Harley enthusiast who allowed me to hang out in his garage after school. He was more of a father figure to me than my actual parents ever were. He listened when I spoke and taught me real skills. Meanwhile, Emily was winning science fairs with projects that my parents funded, while I was getting my hands dirty, rebuilding carburetors and tuning engines on classic bikes. Mr. Thompson would high-five me when I accomplished something, but at home, my achievements went unnoticed. The common refrain in our household wasn't "good job" or "I'm proud of you." Instead, it was, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" I swear, I heard that phrase so often that I thought it might as well have been my name. When Emily got accepted into a prestigious science program in 10th grade, my parents splurged on a $2,000 gaming laptop for her educational purposes, along with a new desk setup, and even took the family out for a fancy steak dinner. But when I successfully rebuilt my first engine, a vintage model that even Mr. Thompson said was a challenge, my parents couldn't even be bothered to look up from their dinner. I walked in, brimming with excitement, and said, "Hey, I got that Sportster running today." All I got in response was a grunt and a request to keep it down. It wasn't just that they ignored my interests, they actively tried to undermine my motorcycle phase. My motorcycle magazines would mysteriously disappear, and tools I bought with my own money would vanish from the garage. Once, after saving for 3 months to buy a used repair manual collection, my mom donated them during spring cleaning because she claimed they were cluttering my room. Meanwhile, Emily's bedroom looked like a tech store exploded in it, new gadgets, stacks of books, and special lighting to help her brilliant mind thrive. I, on the other hand, was scolded for having dirty fingernails from working on engines. The worst part was when relatives visited. My parents would showcase Emily like a prized trophy. Emily got accepted into the governor's STEM program. Emily won first place at regionals. Emily is being recruited by MIT. Then, some uncle or cousin would turn to me and ask what I was up to. Before I could even respond, my mom would jump in with, "Oh, he's just going through a rebellious phase with those motorcycles. He'll grow out of it and get a real job eventually." They would then add something supportive like, "Not everyone can be academically inclined like Emily. We're still waiting to see what he'll do with himself." Then, they'd change the subject back to Emily, as if I wasn't even worth a conversation. By my senior year, Emily had already been accepted to 3 elite universities with full scholarships. My parents had turned our refrigerator into a shrine for her acceptance letters, literally plastered with them. I'm not exaggerating. I had decent grades, but I also had a solid life plan. I wanted to open a motorcycle repair shop specializing in American classics. I had been working part-time at the local garage for 2 years, saving every dollar I earned and studying business plans at night. My boss recognized my talent, and customers specifically requested me to work on their bikes. But none of this registered with my parents. To them, my future was a joke because it didn't involve a fancy degree or a desk job. Every time I mentioned my shop plans, my mom would look at me with a pained expression, as if I had just announced my intention to become a professional dumpster diver. They wouldn't even acknowledge my dreams, they would literally pretend I hadn't spoken. The irony was that my parents weren't even successful themselves. My dad was a middle manager at an insurance company, constantly overlooked for promotions, while my mom was an administrative assistant who spoke about her career as if she were running the place. My entire existence felt like a backup plan. I didn't voice my thoughts, I just went to work as usual, but inside, my mind was racing. For months, I had been researching different cities as potential escape routes, and Austin kept coming up. It had a vibrant motorcycle scene, a manageable cost of living, and business regulations that wouldn't suffocate a new shop like they would back home in New Jersey. When I got home that evening, I waited until my parents left for their weekly date night. Then, I packed up everything I owned, went to the bank, and withdrew my entire savings. I left my house key on the kitchen counter along with a note that read, "Gone to build my future since there's no place for it here. I'll be in touch when I get settled." With that, I drove off to Austin. My mom called me 5 times that first week. Not once did she ask if I was okay or if I had a place to sleep. Instead, I received a series of frantic voicemails about how selfish and inconsiderate I was for abandoning the family right when they needed to focus on Emily's college preparations. The best voicemail was when she actually said, "Your timing is so inconsiderate. We were going to need you to drive Emily's things to campus and help her move in. Now we'll have to hire someone or take time off work ourselves." Heaven forbid they lift a finger for their golden child when they had a perfectly good pack mule they could have used instead. The first month in Austin was incredibly tough. I rented a room in a rundown house with 4 other guys for $400 a month. The bathroom had a black mold issue that probably took years off my life, and my bedroom was essentially a converted pantry, barely big enough for a twin mattress. I found a job at a local repair shop where the owner, Tom, was an old-school biker who had been wrenching since the 70s. He looked like Santa Claus if he were part of a motorcycle gang, massive white beard, arms covered in faded tattoos, and a permanent scowl that made customers nervous. But the man was a mechanical genius. Tom started me at $14 an hour, almost double what I was making back home. I took every shift I could get, regularly pulling 60 hours a week. On my days off, I helped people fix their bikes out of our house's garage for cash jobs, building a reputation and some side income. My roommates thought I was crazy for working so much, but they appreciated the extra cash I contributed for taking up garage space. I lived on practically nothing: ramen, eggs, and whatever fast food was on special. No cable, no streaming services, no bars or clubs, just work, sleep, and the occasional bike meet where I networked with local writers and handed out cards for my side gig. As time went on, my parents' calls became less frequent and eventually stopped altogether when I refused to engage with their guilt trips. They sent me one care package filled with college brochures for schools in Austin, which I had a good laugh about before tossing it in the dumpster. About 3 months in, I finally hit my stride. Tom started giving me more challenging repair jobs, and customers began asking for me specifically. One guy brought in a clapped-out 70s Triumph that 3 other shops had given up on. I spent an entire weekend figuring out some weird electrical issue, and when the owner picked it up and heard it purring like a kitten, he tipped me $200 cash on top of the repair bill. That night, sitting on my shabby mattress and counting my money, I realized something: I was making it. Not thriving, not comfortable, but surviving completely on my own terms. No one was telling me my dreams were stupid. No one was making me feel like a consolation prize in my own life. For the first time in 18 years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and that felt better than any college acceptance letter. After a year of barely sleeping and eating, I had saved enough for a decent loan application. My credit had improved from paying bills on time, so the bank only required a 30% down payment instead of a cosigner. I started scouting locations during my lunch breaks. Austin was booming, so most decent spots were way out of my price range. After weeks of searching, I found a total dump on the edge of town. The previous tenant had been a vape shop that went under. Shocking, I know. The place had dingy yellow walls and lighting that made it look like a serial killer's basement, but it had good highway visibility, and the rent wasn't completely insane. Most importantly, it was zoned for automotive work, so I could actually fix bikes there. I'll never forget signing those lease papers, 20-year-old me committing to $1,750 a month in rent alone. Adding utilities, insurance, and all the other business expenses saga, where the atmosphere shifted from awkward to surreal. The moment Sarah dropped the bomb about my Instagram following, the entire room went dead silent. I could practically see the dollar signs forming in my parents' eyes. "How do you know all that?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "We weren't even connected on social media." "Oh, I Google everyone," Sarah shrugged, still wearing that irritating smirk. Occupational hazard of consulting. You're actually pretty easy to track online. Tons of articles, build features, customer reviews, very impressive digital footprint for a grease monkey. She even did air quotes, as if my work was somehow beneath her. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and unsettling. My parents, who had barely acknowledged my existence for the past 7 years, suddenly transformed into proud parents. They started telling Alex about how I'd always had a mechanical mind and how they'd encouraged my passion from day one. I nearly choked on my food. The audacity of these people was astounding. "You what?" I exclaimed, incredulous. They laughed it off with a dismissive wave. "Don't be modest, son. We always knew you'd figure it out eventually." This was coming from the same people who once told me that fixing motorcycles was a career for those too stupid to get real jobs. The rest of dinner felt like a bizarre episode of a reality show. My parents continued to fawn over Sarah and her fiancé, but now they were also trying to include me in the conversation, as if they hadn't spent years belittling my dreams. They asked about my shop, my customers, and how I managed to build a successful business. I answered their questions, but I could feel the tension in the air. It was as if they were trying to rewrite history, to paint themselves as supportive parents who had always believed in me. As the evening wore on, I found myself growing increasingly uncomfortable. I had come home to show them that I wasn't the family failure they thought I was, but instead, I felt like I was being paraded around like a trophy. They were proud of my success now that it was tangible, now that it could be measured in dollars and Instagram followers. But where were they when I was struggling? Where were they when I needed support and encouragement? After dinner, we moved to the living room, where my parents continued to gush over Sarah's accomplishments and my newfound success. I sat there, feeling like an outsider in my own family. The walls were still adorned with framed photos of Sarah's graduations and awards, but now they felt like a prison, a reminder of the years I had spent feeling invisible. At one point, my mom turned to me and said, "You know, we always believed you had it in you. It just took you a little longer to find your path." I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind her of all the times they had dismissed my dreams, all the times they had compared me to Sarah. But instead, I just nodded, forcing a smile. As the night came to a close, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. I had achieved so much on my own, yet here I was, back in the same house that had once felt like a suffocating cage. I had built a life for myself, but it felt tainted by the realization that my parents were only interested in my success now that it was visible and profitable. When I finally left their house that night, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had shown them that I wasn't a failure, that I had built something meaningful. But I also felt a deep sadness for the relationship I would never have with them. They would never understand the sacrifices I had made, the struggles I had endured to get to where I was. As I drove back to my apartment in Austin, I reflected on the evening. I had come home to prove myself, but instead, I had been reminded of the chasm that existed between my family and me. I was proud of what I had accomplished, but I also knew that my success would never be enough to bridge that gap. I was no longer the backup kid, I was my own person, but the scars of my past still lingered. In the end, I realized that I didn't need their validation. I had built a life that I was proud of, and that was enough. I would continue to grow my business, to take on new challenges, and to create the future I had always dreamed of. My family's opinion no longer mattered. I was finally free. And slander, determined to put an end to this absurd narrative my parents were spinning. I couldn't believe the lengths they were going to in order to paint me as the villain in their story. It was infuriating, but I also felt a strange sense of empowerment. They had underestimated me for far too long, and now they were trying to manipulate the narrative to gain sympathy and financial support from others. As I sat in my small apartment, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief. My parents had always been dismissive of my dreams, and now they were trying to rewrite history to make it seem like I owed them everything. I had built my business from the ground up, and I wasn't about to let them take credit for my hard work. I had done it all on my own, and I was proud of that. The lawyer I spoke to was supportive and assured me that I had a strong case. He explained the steps we would need to take to gather evidence and build a solid argument against my parents. I started compiling screenshots of their posts, comments from friends and family, and any other evidence that would support my claim. It was a tedious process, but I was determined to fight back. Meanwhile, the GoFundMe campaign continued to gain traction. I watched in disbelief as more and more people contributed, believing my parents' fabricated story. It was surreal to see strangers rallying behind them, completely unaware of the truth. I felt a sense of urgency to act before the situation spiraled even further out of control. As the days passed, I received more messages from distant relatives and acquaintances, all expressing concern for my parents and questioning my character. It was maddening. I had always been the family ghost, and now I was being thrust into the spotlight as the villain. I decided it was time to take action. I reached out to a few close friends who had witnessed my journey and knew the truth about my struggles and successes. I asked them to write testimonials about my character and the hard work I had put into building my business. Their support meant the world to me, and I knew it would help counter the narrative my parents were creating. After gathering enough evidence and testimonials, I felt ready to move forward with the defamation case. My lawyer filed the necessary paperwork, and I prepared for what would likely be a long and arduous process. I knew my parents would fight back, but I was determined to stand my ground. As the legal proceedings began, I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. I was finally taking control of the situation, and I was no longer going to let my parents dictate my narrative. I had worked too hard to let them undermine my success and manipulate others into believing their version of events. In the meantime, I continued to focus on my business. I poured my energy into my shop, working on custom builds and expanding my clientele. I was determined to prove that I was more than just my parents' son. I was a successful entrepreneur in my own right. The support from my friends and loyal customers kept me motivated, and I was grateful for the community I had built in Austin. As the case progressed, I found myself reflecting on my relationship with my parents. It was painful to acknowledge that they had chosen to turn against me instead of supporting my success. I had hoped that my achievements would bring us closer, but instead, it had driven a wedge between us. I realized that I had to let go of the idea of a perfect family and accept that my journey was mine alone. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I was ready to stand up for myself and reclaim my narrative. As I walked into the courtroom, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of everything I had accomplished. I was no longer the backup kid, I was a force to be reckoned with. The hearing was intense, with my parents presenting their case and trying to paint me as the villain. But I stood firm, presenting my evidence and testimonials. I could see the disbelief in their eyes as the truth began to unfold. I was no longer the family ghost, I was a successful entrepreneur who had built a life for myself against all odds. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor, recognizing the defamation and slander my parents had inflicted upon me. It was a bittersweet victory. I had won the battle, but the emotional toll it took on me was significant. I realized that while I had fought for my reputation, the relationship with my parents was irreparably damaged. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. I had stood up for myself and reclaimed my narrative. I was proud of the life I had built, and I knew that I could continue to thrive without my parents' approval. I had learned that family could be complicated, but I was determined to create my own definition of family, one built on support, love, and respect. With my business flourishing and a newfound sense of freedom, I forwarded all the screenshots my cousin had sent me and granted my lawyer access to my financial records. We filed the suit the very next day. My parents were actively damaging my reputation and potentially jeopardizing my business with their lies. A couple of customers had already seen my account tags and mentioned hearing something online about the shop owner having family issues. In a business built on trust and personal reputation, that kind of talk could be fatal. We sent them a cease and desist letter, warning them that if they didn't take the posts down within 48 hours, there would be consequences. We addressed each false claim with counter-evidence. Their response? They doubled down. My dad posted a screenshot of the cease and desist letter with a caption about how I was now threatening legal action against my own parents and trying to silence their pleas for help. My mom went on some local Facebook group for parents and claimed I was legally bullying them because I was ashamed of the truth coming out. My lawyer was practically giddy. He said their actions made our case so much stronger. They were served a legal notice stating that their claims were false and that they had chosen to continue spreading lies. That was textbook malicious defamation. We pushed forward with the suit, and the consequences hit them fast and hard. A local newspaper ran a story, and suddenly my dad was losing accounting clients. Turns out, people don't trust accountants accused of lying about finances. My mom got placed on leave from her elementary school job. Their GoFundMe was frozen when people reported it, and they couldn't provide verification for their claims. Their little social media scam was crumbling around them. A week before our court date, they caved. We settled with terms heavily in my favor. They had to post public retractions, shut down their fundraiser, and pay my legal fees. The best part? They signed an agreement prohibiting them from even mentioning my name online without my permission. My cousin told me they were furious about the humiliation, but honestly, I didn't care. Then, a week later, my parents called from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. They started with, "Son, this has all gotten out of hand. We're family, we shouldn't be fighting like this. Your mother and I are willing to put all this behind us if you're ready to be reasonable." I couldn't believe the nerve they had. I repeated, "What do you want? I don't care if things got out of hand. You made your own bed. Please, we're in a tight spot financially since this whole misunderstanding. My business is suffering, and your mother might lose her job. We didn't expect things to go this far. We are really sorry," they said. Translation: we didn't expect to get screwed for trying to ruin your reputation. That's not my problem, I replied. We're done. If you contact me again, I'll report you for harassment. Now deal with the consequences and just leave me alone. With that, I hung up and blocked the number. Since that phone call last year, I never heard from them again. Meanwhile, my career continued to boom. I just opened our second location, and we were now the premier custom motorcycle shop in Central Texas, boasting an 8-month waiting list for builds. I had 20 employees, a restored farmhouse outside Austin, and the freedom to build the kinds of bikes I used to dream about while being told I was wasting my life. So that's my story, Reddit. The next time someone tells you that family comes first or that blood is thicker than water, remember that some family ties are actually chains. Cut them if you need to in order to build your own life. Success is the sweetest revenge. Edit. Thanks for all the awards and supportive comments. To answer some common questions: 1. Stop asking if I ever plan to reconcile with them, you already know the answer. 2. Yes, I dated a couple of times during these years, but nothing worth mentioning, it ended fast. 3. Stop asking why none of you can find Lonar's Instagram, I changed all the names for obvious reasons.